also always been someone whose like major form of entertainment is taking walks. So it felt more so like the pandemic made that socially acceptable. So before, I was the one asking friends to go take walks with me, and it was a little odd, but now it seems a little more commonplace. A lot of these stories, or maybe about a quarter of these stories, a third of these stories I wrote before the pandemic. But I think it was during the pandemic that I started to see this pattern that, oh, I keep writing stories about characters who are walking or on nature trails. And it first started as a joke that I'm going to write a collection of nature trail stories. Wouldn't that be career suicide? Like, no one would want to read that book. And so I think I put that out just as a, silly tweet a couple years ago. And then I was like, you know what? The best art projects start as a joke. I'm going to keep going with this and see where it goes. And that's when I started intentionally writing stories that were set on nature trails or had some sort of relationship to nature and being outside and finding little bits of the natural world amid cities as well. And yeah, a few years later, I've got a collection of them, and the joke has become a reality.
Right. And I feel like part of my pandemic experience as like an avid walker myself, I think a lot of writers are walkers and runners. It's
Yeah,
like some sort of necessary behavior to kind of balance us out or something. But
I think so
I
too.
did find myself getting a little bit annoyed during the pandemic that suddenly the trails were flooded with people who otherwise would not have been out there, but they just
Yeah.
needed something to do, or they couldn't go to the gym, or whatever it was. And I was like, oh, so now everybody has decided that this is the thing. Did you experience that? Were you sort of bummed out?
Yeah, somewhat. My favorite local trail, because I moved to Virginia about 5 years ago, and I didn't discover my favorite local trail until about a year before the pandemic. So I did definitely notice the difference between pre-pandemic, how crowded it was, and afterwards. So it is a little bit like that experience of being a teenager and loving a niche band, and then it gets popular and you're like, God damn it.
Yeah, you're like, and you get all sort of like haughty about it. You're like,
Yeah,
I used to
I knew
see I
this
used to see that
before.
I used to see that band in small clubs.
Yeah.
I loved them before anybody loved them.
Now you can't
Uh,
find a parking spot.
right, right. So, are you willing to divulge what your favorite nature trail is? You live in Charlottesville, right?
Yeah, that's right. Riverview Park is my favorite. And it's not like a little known secret or anything. I do have those trails that are lesser known when I don't want to be around a bunch of children. But the plus side is a lot of people walk their dogs, and I love seeing dogs on my walks too. So that's a
Yeah,
plus.
I feel like too in this collection that in a lot of the stories, the characters that you're writing about are kind of oddballs or on the margins or are going through a period of change or something in life that has them feeling isolated or something like that. And it
Mm-hmm.
made me think of like my history as a hiker and a walker,
Hmm.
but in particular as a hiker and a person who's kind of a creature of habit. And I think people who walk regularly have some of that
Yeah.
tendency. And it's funny when you see the same people over and over again on a
Mm-hmm.
trail. That's what I was feeling when I was reading this. I was like, oh, like I feel like maybe you were picking up characters on your regular hike in the park or whatever. Is that true or false?
Um, no, I don't think that's directly true for any of these. I mean, some of these are more inspired by my own life. But I don't think there are any characters that I witnessed on a trail that I then fictionalized. That would have been a great idea, and I kind of wish that I had done that. But I definitely know what you mean about the regulars, where sometimes I see certain people on that trail that I'm at every other week, and I think they're my uncle or something because I've seen them so many times. They have that familiarity about them.
Well, yeah, and it's also like, oh, so you're one of the weirdos too. That's
Yeah.
kind of how I feel. Start to see the same people.
Uh-huh.
It's a little bit humbling almost. You're like, okay, why are we doing this every single day? And what's interesting for me in Los Angeles is that there are so many, like, I believe they're like elderly Korean people, a lot of couples too,
Hmm.
who hike first thing in the morning. And I guess it's like I mean, there's often groups, so I guess it's like a social thing, but it also has to be some kind of cultural thing. Cause I'm like, wow, like, so many older Korean people are up hiking, and then it's me. And I've had like, over the years, time to sort of figure out who the regulars are. And I'm always like waving and,
Yeah.
back and forth
Do
and
they
just
wave
thinking,
back?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's like this kind of like, you sort of recognize one another, for
Mm.
your obsession. But I'm wondering why we walk. I guess it is, I mean, it's good
Mm.
exercise. It's nice to get outside. I like to be in nature. I feel better after I do it. I think there's some kind of mood regulation component to it. Is this sounding familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the few times that I feel I allow myself to just stop and watch. And I mean, a lot of the people I walk with, um, we don't seem like-minded in the way that I always have to stop and like look at the turtles on the water, or observe the new little plants that I've never seen before. And I just need to take those breaks to pause and watch and just be silent. Um,
So wait, wait,
and I
wait. Are
don't
you
think
wait?
you get that
Are you
much.
are you a social hiker? Are you going with people? Or are you usually alone?
Probably 50-50. So when
And
I
if
go with people, or like with my husband, I'm like, I stop and just like suddenly stop talking, and sometimes it gets a weird reaction. But then like more recently, I took a walk on this trail with a new friend that I had met recently, and I stopped and she stopped too, and we kind of had the same sort of feeling in the air. I didn't sense any irritation. I'm like, okay, you're my new hiking buddy. Like, we're on the same wavelength, because I feel like that's kind of rare. I mean, do you do the same thing? Or
not really.
do you need movement, constant movement?
I'm moving pretty much, especially on the way up because I'm climbing, and
Oh, right.
I don't like to stop. I'm trying to like break a sweat and like get my heart rate up to some,
Mm.
I don't know, like that's part of like you get the high from that, which is I think what I'm kind of going for, the endorphins. But
Ah, okay.
I
Maybe we do
probably
it for different
should.
reasons. Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm listening to something. I'm always listening to like a Buddhism podcast.
You're
For
listening
I
to
mean,
a Buddhism podcast and you don't like pause to have that meditative moment?
I'm not looking. I mean, there's occasionally there'll be like a deer or a coyote or something, but I'm not like looking at turtles. I don't know. If there
Yeah,
was a turtle to look at, I would look at it, but I'm not the person. I'm not the person who pauses to like
I'm
look at
not
a
going to
leaf.
notice. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I should. Maybe I should.
Yeah, try it.
So you will truly stop and just like gaze at a turtle for like a minute or two or longer,
Yeah, absolutely. I need that. I need that in my life.
just to make yourself stop.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, otherwise, and I mean, speaking of like Buddhism and it being a meditative practice, like I do try to meditate every day, but it doesn't feel the same to me as being outside and walking and then stopping. And it doesn't feel the same to me as sitting outside on my porch. There's just something that I think pulls me out of my brain and makes me feel more connected if I'm in a new place and witnessing something non-human but living in the moment. That feels more meditative to me than any other experience just sitting.
Well, you can do walking meditation. I mean, that's kind of what I'm doing, I think. You're supposed to pay attention to like the sensation of your footsteps touching the ground, which isn't
Mm,
easy. It's not easy to stay
yeah.
locked in on that. But that's kind of what I'm doing. But I suck at it. It's amazing how long I've been meditating and how, like, I guess bad at it. My batting average in terms of actually staying focused on what I'm supposed to be focusing on is not great, but I keep doing it.
I feel reassured hearing that, because I feel the same way.
I gotta say,
I've been
it's
doing it my
probably,
whole life, basically.
yeah, it's got to be normal. I think that's normal. But I think that's
Yeah.
part. I think that's actually the point, is to just be aware of how often you're sort of getting pulled away from.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But um There's a time when I used to be able to meditate for like an hour, and I don't know what happened. I can't do 10 minutes anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, but wait, you say you've been doing this your whole life. Did I know that? Did we talk about that last time?
No, I don't think we did. No, the religion I was raised in was very much rooted in meditation.
What religion is that?
Self-Realization Fellowship.
Oh, right.
Have you heard
There's
of
one
it?
of the Yeah, there's one of those right here in LA. I want to say that's like
Yeah.
the what is it, Yogananda, or who is it?
Yep, Yogananda. Yeah, LA is definitely like, I mean, anybody I talk to in Michigan or here in Virginia, like, mention it, they're like, no, never heard of that. Sounds culty. I'm like, yeah. It's more of a benign cult. But yeah, he lived in LA or in Malibu when he moved from India in the 1950s. And Lake Shrine is like an incredible, beautiful place in Malibu where there are these trails and Swami Beach, and there's all of these little like tourist spots that I hit up that my dad brought me to when I was a kid because he's obsessed with Yogananda and Self-Realization Fellowship. But
wait,
yeah, so I grew up doing this.
Oh my God. Okay. So I want to say Yogananda was who Steve Jobs was into. I think he read
Really?
the book. Is Autobiography of a Yogi by
Yes.
Yogananda? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Jobs used to give that book out like as a gift, like
Really?
regularly.
Okay. See, I knew about the Beatles. I mean, like Yogananda is on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band along with the other gurus of Self-Realization Fellowship, but I didn't know about Steve Jobs.
Okay. So what was it? What was it like? Because now, but I feel like this is connected to the fact that you wrote a collection called Nature Trail Stories. I mean,
I think so.
There's some thread. There's at least one thread from
There's something there.
From self-realization to looking at turtles.
Yeah. And I mean, and it might also just be my dad because he's also very into nature, and it's where I got my love of taking walks. He studied botany and is an avid gardener. Used to work for the USDA and for some organic farms. So I think that's all wrapped up together. But definitely, I think the nature component and meditation and mindfulness is all kind of wrapped into itself.
Okay, so just to satisfy my curiosity, because I don't know enough about any of this, but Yogananda was Hindu or Buddhist?
Yeah, he was Hindu, but brought his religion to the West, kind of like marrying it with Christianity. So his teachings come from both the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible. And it's kind of like all of his interpretations of it. And I'm by no means a scholar. This is all based on me going to church when I was a kid. And
sure, yeah.
In high school and college, I lived and worked at this yoga retreat that was based on the religion. That was kind of more like a spiritual commune. So all of my knowledge is kind of from that. Like I'm not a member of the church anymore. I just still try to meditate. But so it's sort of like a Hindu Christian fusion through the eyes of Yogananda, and he's written a ton of books. And so that is the guru that a lot of people follow, and that he's the guy who founded this religion.
Was he dead when you were a kid? Like, I don't even know when he lived till. Like, did he?
Yeah, I think he died in like 1980 or the 70s, maybe. Okay. Gosh, I'm not gonna. I can't let my dad listen to this because he'll be like so ashamed. But right. Yeah, and like the lore goes that he decided when he was going to leave his body, and when he died, his body smelled like roses. That was one thing.
As soon as people start, and like, there's also, I've heard these stories which seem apocryphal about, like, you know, certain advanced beings dying, and then their corpse like shrinks and like basically disappears, so all that's left is like hair and nails, which is disgusting, right? It's like, okay, I don't know why this is considered a virtue. This sounds like horrific to me, but why do we need to go there? Why do we need to mythologize this stuff? He was a person, he died. Know. He didn't smell like roses. Enough already.
Yeah, we can. I think we should be able to appreciate the teachings of a very wise person without having to believe they were magic. Yes. I mean, I don't know if you ever have read any of Autobiography of a Yogi, but a lot of the stories were basically like, he did this thing that was magical because he's so enlightened.
I'm willing to believe that might be possible. I've never laid eyes on one bit of human magic in my life. Like, nobody's ever levitated. I've never had somebody, I've never seen a ghost. I've never had somebody read my mind in a serious way. That's not to say that this stuff doesn't maybe happen, but I've just never seen it.
Yeah.
So I'm skeptical. And I think too, like, I'm always a little leery of guru culture.
Mm-hmm.
And this would extend even to people like the Dalai Lama. Like, okay, here's what I would say: guru culture, and also like hereditary guru culture. The thing that I get a little bit bugged out by is when it's like, oh yeah, he was born as the reincarnation of,
Right.
because then these
Who decided
people,
that?
yeah, who decided that? And then these people are essentially raised like royalty. You know,
Right.
they never really have to be a real human being in the world. They're considered deities almost. And so I don't know. I think that actually is a strike against them for me, because I'm like, I don't know if I fully buy this, and maybe it's real,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I like it better when
I
it's
feel you
just
on
like
that.
I like it better when it's just like somebody who's just some person from, especially when they're like from the wrong side of the tracks or whatever. Like they have no advantages in life, but they've managed to
Mm-hmm.
attain some kind of deep understanding. That feels more believable to me.
Well, there probably are those people, but they wouldn't have the resources for you to know about them.
Often, but sometimes they do. I mean, I feel like a guy like Thich Nhat Hanh, I'm a huge fan of, Ajahn Chah. These are just like poor people, relatively poor people from
Mm.
Southeast Asia. Like they didn't have any, nobody like anointed them, you know, but they
Hmm.
emerged because based on the strength of their like charisma and teachings and whatever. I think that's always possible, right? Somebody's really smart, gets good at something, becomes a teacher. Like that
Becomes
seems
Thich
like,
Nhat Hanh or Steve Jobs.
yeah. I don't know, but anyway, the I'm curious. I want to know about, because you were raised in Michigan.
Yeah,
That doesn't seem
that's
like
right.
a place that's like a hotbed for like Yogananda disciples. That
Yeah,
I was,
no.
I'm from the Midwest. I never met a Yogananda disciple during my time in Wisconsin. So you must have been sort of an oddball, like
Oh
against
yeah,
the
absolutely. I mean, I wanted nothing more when I was a kid than to go to like a real church and not a place that was in uh, an office building where we just set up a bunch of chairs and meditated with a small group of random people from the area. It was always like, once it was in our church was in a private school, like in a classroom on Sundays. It was in an office building next to my dentist. It was, and I think still is, above a bank. So it's not like a real, it doesn't look like a church. And I just feel like I always heard about Christianity, and most of my friends were Christian, but I didn't even meet another vegetarian, because that's part of the religion too, until I don't know when. I was always a weirdo for that, and my house growing up had pictures of Yogananda everywhere, so I was always just like very embarrassed and like felt othered and strange, and like I had to hide this about myself.
Where were the pictures of Yogananda in your house?
In the living room, in my parents' bedroom, probably one in the kitchen.
Uh
But
huh.
so and that's not so strange if it's Jesus, but
That's right.
yeah, most people were like, I remember friends coming over, and because Yogananda had very long hair, and they'd look at the picture and be like, "Who's she? Is that your relative? Is that your grandma?
Yes,
Your
yes,
distant
it is my
Indian relative?"
it is my distant grandmother. But that's wild. That's wild. But I feel like maybe now, do you have appreciation for it? Like, do you look back fondly and say, "Yeah, I'm glad." I mean, I feel like you kind of
Yeah.
did okay
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things, considering what you could have been up against with some of these Christian sects.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I mean, I feel grateful for my relationship with um with the natural world, with that I was raised to like appreciate all beings and like care for animals. And there's less materialism than a lot of at least certain sects of Christianity. There's not a lot of shaming. There's no, you need to be afraid of hell. I think my relationship with the idea of death is probably much more comfortable and comforting because I was raised with the idea of reincarnation and that, you know, when you die, you just leave your body. So I think that, I mean, I'm certainly still afraid of death, but I think there were some pretty good belief systems in terms of religious foundational belief systems that can be fed to a child. I think this one was pretty preferable over a lot of others.
Yeah, like relatively benign.
Yes.
But nowadays you say you can't meditate for more than 10 minutes, even though you used to be able to go for like an hour at a time.
Yeah.
Do you know why?
I don't know. I mean, I went a while. I think for a while I had this sort of like rebellion against the religion, and I was just tired of being told that I can fix everything in my life by meditating. Because that's really frustrating, especially when you struggle with, as I have, with mental health issues and like anxiety and depression. Like, you don't want to be told that it's your fault that you feel this way and you just need to choose to be happy, which was a big belief of the religion. And I think one that is a little more harmful is that I was always told you need to choose to be happy, just choose to be happy. And I think there is some truth to that, but of course that's minimizing a lot of external factors and things. I think, you know, I didn't like seek out therapy or medication for a really long time because there was a lot of shame in the fact that, oh, you're having trouble living your life and maybe you don't want to live all the time. Well, that's your own personal feeling, and you don't have the faith or dedication to your own practice of spirituality, and that is really difficult. So I struggled with that for a long time, and I kind of just more recently started connecting to different forms of mindfulness that are not related to this religion because I still have a little bit of prickly feelings about it in that way.
I bet. Yeah, I relate to that, but in a different way. I think often, I mean, because I was raised Catholic, there were no pictures of Yogananda in my house. Though my grandmother, there was like a big, like one of these big old sort of standard issue paintings or reproductions of the Last Supper.
Oh,
I
nice.
distinctly remember it from my grandparents' kitchen
Mm-hmm.
in South Louisiana, where you'd be sitting at their kitchen table, and you know we're Italian, so we'd be like eating pasta, and I'd be looking up and like,
oh,
Jesus
wow.
would be. But I think if you are raised in a religion that you don't fully subscribe to, or that doesn't feel true to you, or that, I don't know, just if you have any kind of doubt or if it's not a hand in glove fit, it's easy to feel a little bit embittered. It can feel like a big, I relate to this feeling, this idea of feeling, especially in your youth, like there was a failing happening because you weren't good enough at it, or you didn't believe hard enough, or you just didn't get
Right.
it. So of course you're going to feel a little bit bitter later on.
Yeah, absolutely. They can only sell religion if they can advertise it as it's going to fix all of your problems. So then you tend to think that it's your own fault for not believing hard enough when you still have problems.
Well, and I think too, and I think this is an interesting space, especially with contemplative, the more contemplative, meditative practices that you tend to see in Eastern religions, is the middle ground between, say, Western psychotherapy and Western pharmacology and Eastern meditation practice, and how and when to bridge that divide. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I do think in really kind of doctrinaire Eastern meditative practice, there might not be much understanding of, say, drugs to help you with depression or anxiety. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like how?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's much.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I think it's changing, but I don't know if traditionally there had been much dialogue between the two.
I would be interested to hear from more folks who are educated on that intersection, because it does seem important. It's like, yeah, I don't think you should believe that drugs are going to fix everything in your life, but I don't think you should believe religion's going to fix everything in your life. And I do in ways crave the relationship my dad had with religion, or still has, because and other people have with their faith, because it does seem so comforting and to provide guidance. But when you don't really have that, then you're just kind of relying on yourself and trying to figure out what's the right concoction of mindfulness, religion, self-exploration, and working on improving yourself, self-improvement, and drugs if you're open to them.
So are there any pictures of Yogananda in your house currently, or no?
Right now I have a stack of all of the Yogananda books my dad's given me over the years in a bag in my closet.
Okay.
So there's that.
There's that. So let's go. I want to turn back to your book, and I want to talk about the characters that you're drawing in these stories. And I guess I kept thinking to myself, like, so many of them feel like they're at the margins. I want to know more about why these kinds of characters and these kinds of people.
I think to some extent, it's going to sound really narcissistic, but aren't all writers narcissists to some extent? I was going to say all the characters are me, Well, there's always some sort of emotional truth to them. And I think I have to have experienced it firsthand to be able to write them. And maybe that's not true for all writers, but it's true for me. So I think every character that I've written in these stories, they were created to explore something that I'm struggling with at the time. I just try to vary the circumstances, either to heighten the experience of whatever this emotion or internal conflict is, or because I'm just interested in exploring different types of characters, and also a little bit for the diversity of the collection, because that is one thing about having a constraint on yourself of trying to write a whole collection of stories set on nature trails. If the setting is the same in all of the stories, your characters and conflicts better be pretty different for it to stay interesting, both for yourself as the writer and for the reader. So it was kind of a mixture of those things.
So, and you talked about tweeting about it and sort of making a joke and then kind of following through on the joke. How many, and forgive me if you already said this, but I'm just trying to trace the history of the collection. How many nature trail stories had you written by the time you made the joke, or had you?
Probably 5 to 7.
Okay.
I think 5, maybe. Yeah, it's hard to say.
Okay, but I mean, and then how many? I'm trying to remember how many.
I know. I'm like, I gotta count.
But there's about. So you've written a good amount of them, probably 10 altogether.
Yeah, I think there's 12 in the collection.
And so that was the challenge that you gave yourself, is that in terms of trying to create a collection with thematic unity, you're every single one of these is going to somehow involve nature. I'm trying to remember if all of them are outside and on a trail. Not really. Especially I'm thinking of the last story, which I love.
Yeah, that was kind of that one was put in a little bit. That some of them are a little more of a stretch. I tried to make sure the ones that are more blatantly on a nature trail were in the beginning, but then I take a little bit more liberties. There is a nature trail in the last story, but it's kind of just in passing during a music festival that she's at, and the main character kind of sees the trail reflect her attitude toward being at the music festival. At first, it's this beautiful, exciting, unifying experience. And then she starts seeing all the trash everywhere and feels kind of grossed out by the people she interacts with. So that was put in there as sort of a parallel of the character's experience.
I didn't feel like it was like far afield. Like, you know what I'm saying? I felt like there's plenty of
Okay,
nature.
good.
They're at an outdoor music festival in, like, I think rural
Yeah.
Michigan, right? On a
Hmm.
farm. So it felt very, very nature to me. And I love that story. It's called Easier to Convince. And
Yeah.
I think as I was reading it, what I was thinking to myself was, I love the fact that this story takes place at a music festival. We need more narratives set at music festivals. They're such rich
I know,
environments. Like that,
right?
I think back to
Yes.
the like the quote unquote festival experiences of my youth, or like the concert experiences that required travel and like overnight stays. Those are some of the most intense experiences of my life, right?
Right. And you interact with so many different people on such a short time span. And like everybody is immediately your friend if you just talk to them or share food or drinks or drugs or something. And it's just ripe for so much conflict and strange interactions.
It's also interesting to me at the level of collective human energy. Like there is some truth, I think, to the notion that you put, 10,000 people in the same building or at the same amphitheater together. And then, especially if everyone's like, a lot of people are on drugs.
Hmm.
I mean, I have felt that before. I feel that anytime I go to any concert, really, where there's a
Yes.
good crowd, and it feels very palpably real to me. Whether, and you know what, I can experience it sober or not. It's not contingent
Hmm.
upon being like whacked out on drugs. I think you feel that when you're in a room. I think you can feel that at a sporting event, to be honest. Anytime you put a lot of human beings in the same place, uh, you feel it. But I think at a music
Hmm.
festival where people are there for like Dionysian reasons, where you're sort of there to celebrate and to kind of have fun. And when people come with that intention and there is like a festival atmosphere, you feel that energy, and then sometimes, of course, it can go sideways.
Right. Yeah. You're elated and feel such a beautiful connection to people one minute, and the next minute, as was my experience the last time I went to a music festival, you think everyone you look at is trying to kill you.
Really? Oh, that happened to you?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was the
Let's
last time I went.
Right. Okay. Okay. But like, let's talk about this. How long ago was this?
um it was my senior year of college, so
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I guess I was like 21 or something.
Right. That sounds about right. And so I'm imagining it was psychedelics and you had a paranoid
Something
episode.
like that.
Yeah. It's funny because I just got a notification, or what was it? No, I saw on social media the Grateful Dead Instagram feed, which I am a follower of. They were like, and by the way, there's a
I
story in your book
have
which
it.
allude to the Grateful Dead, but um,
Yes.
I received, like, I saw the Grateful Dead post, and it was like 29 years ago today. This was on March 4th. I actually remember the
Mhm.
day. 29 years ago today, at Desert Sky Amphitheater in Arizona, the Dead played a run of 3 shows. Well, I was there, and
Ah!
my friend, a friend of mine who shall go nameless, like ate too many mushrooms and somehow convinced himself that he was dehydrating. This was before the
Oh
show
no.
even started. This was before the show even
Oh
started.
no.
The sun had not set, and like we're just like sitting in the lawn. If you can try to picture this, we're like sitting in the lawn at the amphitheater with our group, all of whom, except for me, had eaten way too many mushrooms.
Oh
Like
no.
just like 19 years old, had no idea what we were doing, but I at least was paranoid enough to be like, I'm not having that many. I'm going to go slow. I don't know what I'm doing, and that served me well. But anyway, we're
Yeah.
sitting there, and my buddy looks at me and he's like, "Hey, man, am I all right?" I was like, "Yeah, you're fine. Yeah, the concert's starting soon. Like, we're good, man." And he's like, "No, do I look all right?" And I was like, "You look fine." And all of a sudden, he just gets up and he starts walking up towards and it's a crowded environment. There's a lot of and a lot of energy. The mushrooms are coming on, and I don't see my friend for the rest of the concert.
Oh my gosh, were you worried?
I mean, yeah, but also I was like, oh, he'll figure it out. What's the
Yeah.
worst that can happen? Yeah. So then the concert ends and I actually do start to get worried because I'm like, okay, so where is he now? But then I just figure like, oh, we'll go back to the car and we'll find him there. And sure enough, we go back and I see him in the distance and he's just like sitting like cross-legged on the gravel, like smoking a cigarette.
That'll
And he's
help
got
your
the,
dehydration.
yeah, he's got this look on his face, like, I've got a story to tell you. And it turned out that he had like walked like straight up the lawn to like where the fence was. And there's like one of these security guys in like a yellow shirt or whatever. And he just goes up to one of them and he's like, I just ate way too many mushrooms. I think I'm dehydrating. I'm scared I'm going to dehydrate and I'm going to die. The guy's like, come on. He's like, come with me. And he's like, do you have any drugs on you? And he's like, I have a bag of weed in my pocket. And he's like, get rid of it. So he takes like a brand new bag of weed and just throws it like into the air. And it like, of course, probably lands in some like deadhead's lap. And they thought it was miraculous.
Yes, miracle.
It was a divine moment. But they take him backstage and there are of course like people there to help people who are bugging out on psychedelics at any dead show. I think
you would hope that there would be like a medical tent at a dead show.
There is a medical tent, and it's like these people are from like I think what's called the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic. And so he's back there, and there's also all these off-duty cops or like cops who are there to provide security, but they're like taking a break.
Mm-hmm.
And he like goes up to like a group of them and starts like berating them, asking them if they read. He's like, you guys are illiterate, like, just like jabbering at these cops. These cops are just looking at him. And then he asks to speak to John Lennon. I mean, like, just like it was bananas. And he was recalling this to me. And then finally came down towards the end of the show and was essentially side stage. He had like backstage passes.
Oh, wow. That worked out.
Yeah, but he's essentially side stage and the Dead are playing their encore. And he's suddenly like, wait a minute, the Grateful Dead are here? That's how bonkers it was. So it's a funny story to this day. I mean, it wasn't funny, I guess, for him when it was happening, but we've been laughing about it for 30 years.
Oh my gosh. At least he got to enjoy the encore.
Kind of. I mean, I think like I don't think he was fully there. I think it was honestly like shocking to him that the Grateful Dead were actually there. So I can relate to this notion of feeling like everyone's there to kill you. In fact, I think that's actually not that uncommon for a psychedelic experience in a huge crowded space like that to turn sort of paranoid, right? Like the energy and the weirdness and the people making eye contact with you, and like you become hypersensitive to like facial expressions and other social cues, and it can be easy to sort of spiral, right?
Yeah, and I already feel like that to some extent, so it was just a bad idea.
Right. Yeah. So those are the ways that festival experiences can kind of turn on you. But I feel
highs are high and the lows are low.
That's right. It's like you're in the trenches sort of when you're there. And I think too, like, some of these experiences involve like camping overnight, and there's like a genuine nature experience sort of attached. And that maybe heightens the intensity. Also can be a lot of fun, but that's part of it in the story that you've written. And I just loved it. I don't know. I loved it.
Well, thank you.
Is the festival experience that you're describing in the story, is it tied to, was this the bad experience that you had, was it at a festival in rural Michigan?
Yeah. So like, I'm not great at I can invent characters and conflict, but I'm not great at inventing settings. So I definitely visualized what was called the Harvest Gathering in Michigan. And I think it still happens. That's in Cadillac, Michigan. Yeah, middle of nowhere. You've probably never heard of it, but on this musician's family farm. So that was pretty similar to it. And it was a festival I went to like the summer before my senior year of high school, and then a few times in college. And it's just like, the first year it was amazing, and then each year it got more crowded, and I got kind of more over it. And then the last time was just horrible. The part about me about the character, where the character pees on a porta potty where the lid is down, that part was true. That happened to me there.
Yeah. It's like these things tend to have diminishing returns, right? The first time's
Hmm.
always the best, and then
Yeah, yeah.
by the end, you're like, "This is filthy."
I've stayed at the party too long.
I stayed at the
Yeah.
party too long. Yeah, but when it's good, it's good.
Hmm. Yep, I'll cherish those memories, and it was really fun to put them in a story.
So, what about the actual writing of these stories and like just like your habits? Like, do you have like a ritual in that sense, or were you just finding pockets of time? I know you teach, so I'm just curious. I'm always curious to know how people get the work done.
Yeah, I have not been great at having a ritual of it lately, except for writing, like journaling in the morning lately. But I'll definitely go on stints of having goals, especially over the summer. If I'm working on a novel, like I'll have a goal of writing 1,000 words a day and making sure I write every day. And sometimes what comes out of that is good, and a lot of times it's not. But typically with short stories, it feels more organic. I'll get an idea and then I feel like I have to write it. And I have the most fun when I'm writing short stories. So it's really exciting to be able to put a collection out there, um, because that's when I really feel just captivated by the idea, and the need to write is when I'm writing a short story. So
What?
those I'll tend to write during, like, well, whenever I have time. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm curious to know why the short fiction feels better to you than trying to work in a longer form.
Yeah, generally. Um, Even my last book, Whimsy, I kind of approached it like a short story collection. Like each chapter I wrote as if it were a short story. But the other novels that I've written have felt a little bit more laborious. I mean, I guess that's the nature of writing something more long form. You have to put more hours into it. Um, so then when I'm working on a book length project, like a novel, that's usually when I'll prescribe myself a schedule. But short stories, I just kind of write when I feel like it. That is the beauty of having a day job and being a writer.
Can you get a draft done in a sitting? Like, 'cause some of these are pretty short. I mean, I'm just wondering, like, are you
Yeah, like
drafting?
flash fiction. Yeah, a lot of these are drafted in one sitting. Easier to convince. That last story we were just talking about, that's the most recent one that I wrote, and actually one that I wrote after I sold the collection, and I'm like, oh, I'd really like to add this in, can I? And that took a while. That I was working on for several weeks or maybe a couple months over this past summer. So that felt like it took more more time and dedication, and I really had to chip away at it. But it's also a longer story. But I do really enjoy flash fiction and being able to sit down and crank out a whole story in one sitting. It's a really thrilling experience.
Well, it's also like it's nice to have a feeling of getting something done. I think part of the
Yeah.
drag of writing like a book length project or novel or a book length work of nonfiction is that you have to live in that like state of limbo for so long. Of is it going to
Yeah.
be a thing? Is it not going to be a thing? Does it
Uh-huh.
suck? Is it good? What I've been working on this for 4 years and I'm still not done. Like all that kind of stuff. It can become emotionally taxing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if I'm cut out for that. I mean, I'm amazed by your most recent book, like Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. Now I'm blanking for a second on the
No, that's
title.
right. That's it.
How long were you working on that?
It's like a decade. But I mean,
Yeah,
there were like entire bad books that I wrote
many
or
iterations of it.
oh my
Yeah.
God, yeah, it was everything. It was like me writing away from it to try to escape it, and then there are other times where I was trying to, just go take a left turn and write something silly, and all the different things that we do to try to avoid ourselves. And
Yes.
it's such a consistent pattern. I mean, not everybody does it, but a lot of writers do. It's like, oh, I've heard it so many times where it's like I finally sat down and just started writing about the thing that I didn't want to write about, and lo and behold,
Right.
everybody loved it. Or
Yeah, yeah.
that was the breakthrough. But I feel like, just between you and me, I feel like Easier to Convince could be broken out into a novel. Like I don't feel like it. I don't feel like as a reader, I was like, oh, I want to keep going. Like I thought that there could be more to explore. And now that we're talking, and you've been telling me about your history with this festival in Michigan, like it would be funny to write a novel about a young woman in college and her 4 experiences at the same music festival, each one sucking.
Ooh.
Each one.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that idea and run with it. Because that is a story that, I mean, that's probably the longest short story that I've ever written. And I did want to write more. And actually, that is a story that, like the kernel, the most important conflict in that story, I tried to write into a novel, and I've been trying to write into a novel for the last several years, but it was a completely different setting. It was kind of like a scary setting, like more of a ghostly, dark novel idea. And then it was just like one night when I was listening to a band that I first heard at this music festival and thinking about how happy I was there and how
what
comforting.
Band?
Breathe Owl Breathe. And sadly, like their first 2 albums that I were so important to me emotionally during those years, I cannot find anywhere now, and like you can't access online, but their more recent stuff is fine too. But like if you're listening, Breathe Owl Breathe, bring back Climb In. I need to listen to it again.
Wait, it's called like owl, like the bird, owl, breathe.
It's called Breathe Owl Breathe is the band. Yeah. And I was obsessed with them and would see them every chance I could get through like late high school and early college. And so anyway, just like writing about something difficult, which that story, a lot of it is about dealing with childhood sexual trauma. Like I couldn't write about it in a scary, dark setting. I kept trying to, thinking like, oh, this is the sort of cinematic novel that will sell. But I emotionally could not do it. And then when I put that same sort of struggle into a setting that felt more fun and comforting, where I could include some humor and some narrative arcs about friendship and just other things to sort of bring some levity to the story, that's when it clicked and when I was able to write it. And so I think kind of like what you're saying about your novel, like trying to get to it from a bunch of different angles, like I had to try a bunch of different ways before I could write about it in a way that worked and felt right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and sounds familiar. And I feel like some of it is temporal distance. I think like if we're writing about trauma or from some sort of difficult lived experience, like however much we may be fictionalizing, if there's that kind of core of truth to it, then sometimes you just need time and perspective. And the reason why earlier iterations don't work is because you can't see it clearly. You know, you're too emotional. And then,
absolutely.
But I don't think that's the only determining factor. Like you say, it could be a creative decision involving like where to set the thing. And like, do you tell the story in a more like realistic from lived experience and memory way, or do you take that lived experience and transpose it onto a new setting and with different characters involved or whatever it is? You know what I'm saying? Like
which
sometimes
is
that's
what I had
the
to
linchpin.
do.
Yeah, and I found
like you need to feel safe.
But I found as a reader that having that dark element to the story where the protagonist is confronting her abuser at a music festival, but it's not like the whole story. It's sort of happening some of the time. It's like almost like a scary sideshow aspect to it. And that feels true to life to me.
Yes.
I feel like a lot of times that's how this stuff happens. It's like you're actually kind of having a good time, but then it's like, oh, there's my nightmare. You know? Like,
right. Yeah.
You know, so it's not all one way. You know, not that it can't happen that way too, but I feel like maybe especially at music festivals, it is this weird hybrid often of like operatic psychodrama and then like goofy party stuff and, you know, friends having a falling out at night, but then making up in the morning and all that kind of stuff. So I like the choice, and I can understand how it liberated you.
Yeah. That was a really important story to me, and I'm nervous to put it out in the world, but it feels pretty monumental to me personally.
It was my favorite story.
Oh, thank you. That's really, really
Yeah,
nice to hear.
I liked it. I loved it. I thought it was really good. And I want to see the novel version.
All right. Well, I'll get cracking.
Yeah, I've thrown down the gauntlet for you.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering about, and I don't, forgive me if I don't know if we talked about this the last time we spoke, but I'm always curious about the ways that a person's day job feeds their creative life. And I know you teach high school English, or at least you did. You still do?
I used to. Now I'm a reading specialist at an elementary school.
Oh, okay.
So it's quite a bit different. And it did, yeah, my teaching job definitely directly impacted my novella Whimsy, which we were talking about last time I was on the podcast. And this job now, it hasn't really come into I've only been doing it for a little over a year at this point. It hasn't really directly come into my short stories or novels, but I did dabble with writing a middle grade novel this fall, and that was really fun. So that's where it came to influence my writing, just getting me to break out into experimenting with writing for a different audience.
What's the status of that project?
It's with an editor who's gonna give me some feedback, but it's a tricky situation because the reason I wrote it is that I work with mostly 3rd and 5th graders, but 1st through 5th grade. I became a reading specialist because as a high school teacher, I also worked with students who couldn't read, who were reading at like a 2nd grade level. And I did not know how to teach a child how to read, because when you become a high school English teacher, they don't teach you how to teach phonics and just the basics of literacy. So that's why I went into the master's in literacy program. And then since I started working with older elementary school students, I see similarities in these students being really frustrated with the kind of text that they can access, because there are children's books that are written about protagonists who are like 4 and 5 years old and they're 11, and it feels really demeaning and shameful for them to be learning how to read with these books that are clearly not written for them. So this novel that I wrote, it's about a 6th grader, but it's written at about a 2nd or 3rd grade level. And the publishing industry does not really have space for that sort of thing, because they write to age levels, and they have expectations for those age level readers that the books that they publish in middle grade or YA are going to be so many pages long, are going to have such and such type of language. So if you're trying to write something for readers who are a little bit older but reading at a lower grade level, you kind of get shut out of the publishing industry, at least from my experience so far and from what my agents told me. It's tough, and it really, really stinks, because those kids deserve to have books that they connect with on a personal level and can access and build confidence in their reading.
Yeah, that feels like a worthy niche. I mean, I think the problem is that it's probably a pretty small niche when you start to break out the numbers in terms of how many young students need that sort of thing. But I hear what you're saying.
But it's growing.
But it's growing, yeah. And I think there are enough, broadly speaking, that if a publisher opted to try to own that niche, it could probably be profitable.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's why books like Diary of a Wimpy Kid and other graphic novels are so wildly popular, because at least the text is limited on the page, which is a big psychological obstacle that a struggling reader needs to get over, is like, how many words are on this page? Because if you look at a page with hundreds of words on it and you struggle to decode each of those words, you're just going to shut down the same way I would shut down if I saw a super long contract and I tried to read it, or a bunch of math problems or my tax forms. I'm just like, no, screw this. I can't do it. You know,
That's a good point. That's a good point. So for people who are hyper literate, like most writers are, and they're like, what do you mean you can't read a page?
Mm-hmm.
Think about how you feel when somebody puts like a really dense piece of like legal paperwork in front of you. You
Yeah.
just go,
Or
I do that. I just shut down. I'm just like,
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
even know. I can't read this. It's like too much or something. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how it feels.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
I hope that somebody comes through for you. That sounds like a cool project. And I have to believe too, to write to that age range, whether you're writing for people who are struggling as readers or you're writing for a more like general audience in that age group, it seems to me that you would have a built-in advantage if you're working with these kids every day. You would have like
Mm-hmm.
a much more like finely tuned sense of the audience than I would have. Though I guess like, I have kids, so I have at least some sense of my own children. But I feel like if you're actually in a group of kids and really get to see what they respond to, that it would make you sensitive to what works, no?
Yeah, and to see what their daily conflicts are like too. I think is another thing. This book that I wrote was set in a school, so it was good to see, the way the students perceive their teachers and the sort of interpersonal conflicts they have. It was really fun to write. So even if it doesn't go anywhere, it was a fun experience. But I would like to pursue more of that type of writing in the future.
You would. Okay. So you think you're going to write YA?
I don't know. I mean, I've tried to write traditional YA novels before, and the voice never really clicked for me. So I'm not sure. I mean, I hate to make set predictions or commitments to the type of writing I'm going to do in the future because my interests shift so rapidly. I'm one of
I,
those people who has a new hobby or 3 new hobbies every year, and writing in general is the first thing that's stuck for me for a long time. So I hate to constrain myself any further.
so what are your hobbies right now?
I'm really into loom knitting and block print making and pole dancing. Those are my 3 biggies right now.
Wow.
That
Okay.
I learned how to do all of them in the last year.
Really? That's cool though. Like to be like, I think like a voracious learner. I know a couple of people like that. They're always like picking something up and like trying to master new skills. But like,
It's fun.
do you have a loom? Like you have a loom then if you're loom knitting.
Yeah, well, so loom knitting is like this won't work for the podcast, but I can show you. It's right over here. It's like a bunch of pegs where you kind of just loop yarn around it. And so far, the only thing I know how to make is hats. So I make everyone I know like a beanie.
I feel like I was loom
It's really
knitting in
fun.
school. I think I had like a loom
Oh
knitting.
yeah, maybe you did.
Yeah, I feel like we did some of that.
The
But I mean,
pegs.
yeah, but I
Yeah,
couldn't do
it's
it.
really great because it's mindless. Because I've done regular knitting and crocheting, and it's like it takes too much of my focus. I like to listen to an audiobook or a podcast while I'm doing it, and I can't keep like with crocheting. You have to kind of keep track of your stitches and count things. And I'm like, I don't want to count anything. I just want to mindlessly move my fingers and move the yarn around and make something that I can
It's
give away.
it's meditative.
Yes. Yeah. Speaking of
Okay.
just different forms of meditation.
So wait, so there's loom knitting and then what were it was pole dancing and what was the third one?
Block print making. So carving into blocks and then printmaking. I don't know if that's the right term, but yeah, you just roll ink over it. You carve your design, roll ink over it, and then press it onto paper. And it's really fun. And
So
that's
what have
how
you
I
been
did.
making?
I've made a few like promo thing. I made Christmas cards, but I also made one that I think I sent you one of them. Take a walk, like a print of trees and a river, and it says take a walk. And then I have another one of a snail because I'm obsessed with snails that says go slow.
Wait,
and I have one that says nature trail stories.
Why are you obsessed with snails? Just because they go slow?
That might be part of it, but the origin story, I'm actually writing an essay about the origin story right now, but I have a vast snail figurine collection that's kind of absurd.
Like Precious Moments figurines or what?
like little porcelain snails, but it all started with buying a snail-shaped planter, like with flowers in it, and then I found another one, and then I got a bunch of little snail-related things. And yeah, I think I like what they represent, and they're slow and sensitive and take their time, and they're the sort of creatures that you don't necessarily notice or appreciate. Yeah, here's one that I have. I get them as gifts now a lot, but
I'm trying to say, okay, yeah.
yes,
I feel like I have some affinity for this too. I like creatures in nature who don't seem to try hard.
yeah, right.
And yet they thrive. And yet they
yeah.
thrive. They seem to be cutting against some human tendency to constantly be doing and achieving and competing. And it's like, what's the snail doing? Snail's
Absolutely.
just enjoying its little tiny life.
I think the same reason we take hikes. Like, you're not going anywhere in particular. You're not making or spending your money. You're just walking for the sake of it.
All right. So pole dancing, I have to believe this is like some sort of exercise class, right? Or do you have an actual pole in your house, or do you just go someplace?
No, I don't, but some of my classmates do.
They bring the
You need ceilings that are a little taller than what I have.
Oh, you do?
And more space than what I have. But there's like a dance studio.
Yeah, and it's good exercise. Like, that's the thing. It's like if you get good at that, you're like really fit.
I mean, I had 0 upper body strength when I started, and now I can do pull-ups, and I feel stronger. I feel like my posture is better. And it's just, I feel kind of kick-ass when I do it.
Are there any guys in the class?
Not that I've met so far. Non-binary folks, but mostly women.
Mostly. Would it be weird if a dude showed up?
Might kind of change the mood in the room a little bit, but I guess it depends on what sort of attitude they bring to the class.
What is the mood in the room?
It's kind of just like, let's have fun and like body positivity and people of all ages and shapes, and just kind of getting to, I think a lot of it has to do with like feeling at home and comfortable in your body without the male gaze around. So I can't say for certain, but I think that it might put a little bit of a damper on that environment.
Suddenly there's like a bro in the class.
Yeah, I mean, but also if there was a bro who was like truly wanted to learn how to pole dance and was into it and able to be vulnerable about it, I would really respect that.
Yeah, I feel like that's, I don't know. I don't feel like that's something I could do. I feel like that's like I don't know. I feel like it requires a level of coordination or something that is beyond me, especially at this age. So I will not
have you ever wanted to go down a fireman pole?
I mean, yeah, when I was a kid, that was like it's a clear memory of mine, is that I got interviewed by my guidance counselor. There was like some sort of thing where she videoed all of us saying what we wanted to be when we grew up, and for some reason I said fireman. So
was it because of the pole?
I mean, I think for little boys, that is part of the fun, right? You get to, and then the truck and the whole thing, and the dog. I think I was also really into the fact that they had a dog. I wanted dogs.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't know. I just feel like it requires a certain, like, because it's not just strength. It's like you also have to have, I feel like there's some sort of like dance component to it or something that it would not look pretty if I was trying to pole dance. In fact, it would get better. You'd get better. By the way, I want to apologize. I want to apologize to listeners for planting in their minds a visual of me attempting to pole dance. I feel like just horrified everybody listening.
I don't know. I think you should try it. Like, the first move you learn is the fireman spin. So I just think that your inner child would really thank you for allowing them that experience. And just, who doesn't love spinning? It's just fun. Doesn't?
Okay. All right. Maybe I'll talk to my wife and see if we can we'll have a pole put in the atrium.
Out of it. Yeah.
What about like this tendency to sort of like take on new hobbies all the time? Does this mean you're cycling through? Like, can you foresee yourself like you'll be done with pole dancing next year and you'll move on to something else? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Are you constantly churning?
I hope that one sticks around, because I recently saw like the upper level pole dancers do their performances, and there was this woman that like when she was clothed and had her glasses on, I clocked her at maybe like 70, and then it was her chance to dance, and like she had her little outfit on, and like her body was sick and her moves were sick, and she was so good, and I want to be that.
Wait, so she's 70 years old?
I think she was probably like upper 60s, maybe 70, maybe in 60s.
I get
great at that, but but that's what I thought she was. That's what I thought her age was, and it may very well be her age, like based on her face. But then her body was incredible, and she was just beautifully, so graceful and strong, and it was just awesome to see and really inspiring. So I'm like, oh, I want to keep doing this. This is really awesome.
I understand that. See, that would get me there, because I have a similar response when I see older people who are still in great shape and are doing like super active, like able to do the things they love, or maybe to do way more than like the typical person their age, because I feel like if you just keep moving and you never stop until you absolutely have to, you're going to be in a much better situation as you age. Like, you know,
I think
so. I used to see this guy when I lived in Boulder. There was this guy who's kind of a legend on the trail. This one trail, he would do it every single day, and he was like 88.
Oh,
and
wow.
He would go. He was moving very slowly at that age. You know, it wasn't like he was cruising, but it was not an easy trail. And he had his two hiking poles. And I mean, like rain or shine or snow or something, he was out there every single day. And I remember even then, I was like, 22 years older, you know, in college as well. I just remember being like, that's who I want to be.
Yeah,
You know?
Me too. I mean, that helps your mental facilities too, like moving, and
All right.
I want to stay healthy for a long time. I hope to live for a long time. I was destined to be an elderly woman. I think I already am at heart, so I want to live long enough to see that.
You feel like you're an elderly woman, like that? That's like your natural age?
That's me. Yeah. My friends used to call me Gladys because I'm like a grandma at heart.
Looking at turtles and knitting.
Yeah.
But
I love big sweaters.
Pole dancing grandma is sort of a curveball. I mean, the knitting, the turtles, the snail figurines.
I mean, I don't want to be totally predictable.
Right. But then it's suddenly like grandma's on the pole.
Hell yeah.
That's cool. So what are you working? I mean, are you working on anything new? Like, are you just publishing this book and having a moment, or is there YA stuff or other stuff in the works?
I had plans to be working on a novel right now, but it turns out working full time and promoting a book is not conducive to also writing a novel.
Right.
But that was set up as a reality TV show script. So also trying to finagle that in terms of a format, and formatting on documents that way is really frustrating. So I've kind of taken a break from that. But
wait. It's a novel, but it was written as like a reality TV show script?
Yeah, it's a novel in the form of a reality TV show script.
Are there scripts for reality TV shows?
Well, if there were, this is what it would be, because it has all of those nods to the formula of reality TV shows, like the confessional scenes and the chyrons and the beats. So it's like each chapter is an episode. I don't know if, who knows if I'll be able to sustain interest in that long enough to like see it through. I don't know. But I'm also working on a couple essays, one of which is the snail collection essay for object lessons. It's called Solid Objects for Hayden's Ferry Review. And also I'm trying to write an essay about my experiences, what I think was happening as a child, where people tried to kidnap me.
Wait, that happened?
Yes.
Holy
Or
shit.
from my childhood perception, at least, like, not really know, like, you don't know if you've actually, if someone was trying to kidnap you until you're kidnapped. And luckily I was never kidnapped, but there were two instances in my childhood where it sure seemed like dudes were trying to get me in their vans.
Really?
Yeah. And just kind of about like how that plays into fear and also perception of threat. Because then I had this experience in this essay writing class in college where a classmate was talking about how she wrote about this experience where this man uh, faced her in an alley and he had a gun, but she didn't actually see the gun. And he's like, well, how do you know for sure he had a gun? And she's like, I just knew. And for some reason that was like, oh, okay, well, maybe they weren't trying to lure me into their vans. But in one instance, I did corroborate this experience with a friend who was with me, and the guy was chasing us down the street, and the van was like, they had the door open, and like he was like, it's going down, and he was chasing us, and she was like, oh yeah, they were totally trying to kidnap us. And then there were news stories about similar occurrences in the neighborhood happening to other young women. So
How did you get away? You just
ran. And I mean, and this is the sort of thing where, if you ever have experiences in your life where they feel cinematic, sometimes in hindsight you feel like you made them up. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but like we were running down 9 Mile Road, and like I was a sophomore in high school this instance, and we were skipping school. So of course then I like couldn't like tell anybody because I didn't want to get in trouble. But yeah, this guy like was first just asking us for money, and then was like trying to grab me, and then this guy pulled up next to him and opened the door of his van, and he told the guy in the van it's going down, and pointing at us. And then we ran away, and then we crossed a street, and then the traffic light changed, and we just kept running and running and running until we got to a 7-Eleven and found a friend who gave us a ride home.
Wow. So were they working in tandem, these two guys? Was it like
That's how I perceived it. That's how it seemed. But I'm also like totally questioning my memory too.
Yeah.
And not even my memory, but like my interpretation of how things went. And that was her interpretation too. But who knows? I don't know. And I think that's the thing about fear too. You can, you might misinterpret situations. It is notable that there were headlines about a similar thing in a similar vehicle happening around the same time to other people in the area. But then the other one was when I was younger. I was probably like 7, and I was hula hooping on my front lawn, and this guy I didn't know pulled up in a van and was like, hey, can you show me how you do that? And I hula hoop a little bit. And then he's like, come closer. I can't see it. And I take a few steps closer and hula hoop a little bit. And he's like, no, closer. And then I just like run into my backyard. And that seemed pretty shady. Like, and he's like,
Good.
oh, I know your family. I'm like, no, bullshit.
Well, I mean, God, now I'm like, it's calling to memory. I had a conversation with a writer earlier this year or last year. It was all about these unsolved murders on the Appalachian Trail, speaking of trails. But it was like an investigative journalism thing where she dove in and realized that there had been a serial killer in an area near the trail who had, like, there had been all these murders in a relatively small geographical area in Virginia. And the dude who ended up being, I think, dead, I don't know. But anyway, he would like, there were all these stories of like, this guy just like walking up to little girls, like while they were like sitting in their front lawn or like on their front porch. And he would pretend to have magazines for sale, but inside the magazines that would be like carved out, there'd be like a gun. I mean, like, and just like grabbing them from their front porches
scary.
And like throwing them in his car, it's like terrifying to think of that stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
Crazy.
It's like, you don't want to like over dramatize situations, but those are things that happen. And I think, I like was laughing as I was telling you, probably out of nervousness, but also self-consciousness about like, is this true, or is this was I misreading the situation? But either way, they were shady situations, and those sorts of things do happen. So
Sure. It's crazy people.
Yeah.
Crazy people.
Yeah.
So last question, just circling back to this reality show story that, or, work that you're drafting. Does this mean that you watch a lot of reality TV?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Real Housewives. I'm a big fan.
Which one?
Really, the only two podcasts I listen to regularly. Well, now I listen to Help Existing with Rachel Krantz, which I know you were a guest on, because now that is out, because Rachel's a friend of mine. But and also it's a great podcast to plug. But before that, the only two podcasts that I listened to regularly was Otherppl and this podcast called Bitch Sesh, which is these two comedians recapping the Real Housewives. And it's so funny and so great. And that is my guilty or not so guilty pleasure is Bravo.
But aren't there different iterations of Real Housewives? It's like Real Housewives of Jersey, of Beverly Hills.
Mm-hmm.
Like what's the best one? It
depends on the season. Like Real Housewives of Potomac is pretty good. Not so much this season. Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, the first two seasons are incredible. You gotta watch.
Is it like, are they Mormon?
Several of them are ex-Mormon. One or two are still Mormon. And one recently has all of this legal trouble because she's like a cult leader. She started her own church, or it was from her family. Her mother was the church leader, and her mother left it in her will that all of her fortune would go to her granddaughter if she married her step-grandfather. So she married her step-grandfather to take over the church. And she's a character. She's a Real Housewife. And then another one is this woman who's now in prison for running this telemarketing scam. And it's just great. Like,
wow.
Speaking of true crime, it's kind of like a true crime show now. But so
I've never watched, but I'll have to check it out. And I will look forward to the Real Housewives of the Self-Realization Fellowship. I don't know when that's coming out. It's going to be an amazing iteration.
Thank you for titling it for me.
Right. Well, Shannon, it's great to catch up with you and to see you, and congratulations to you on the new collection, and best of luck to you on all that you have going.
Thank you so much. Great to talk to you again.